What's going on, Dragons? Happy Friday, and welcome to episode 24 of the EDH, your Friday night Magic pre-show. I got through it that time. We actually fumbled this, our first recording. But I'm your co-host, Corey, and joining me in studio tonight is... Feeling like 24, Cole?
Well, episode 24 it is. I'm feeling pretty good tonight because I think we have a super interesting topic. It's going to be talking about deck maintenance. It's going to be talking about upgrades. This episode is going to have a lot of information about keeping decks fresh and exciting, which is something I think it's a little bit of a spring cleaning, if you will.
I like that. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people get a new deck. They're excited, getting that pre-con or building the deck for the first time, sleeving it up, getting to play, getting to show it off. But down the line, decks tend to get, I'm not going to say they all get stale, but they do need a little bit of refreshment every now and then, whether that's adding in new cards, whether that's doing a total rebuild, whether that's just deciding that deck's not for you and you want to pivot to a different deck. So we're going to kind of talk about that a little bit today and give you guys ideas on how you can get added longevity out of your decks, as well as kind of deciding where to go if you want to build new decks or if you just decide it's time to retire a deck. Cole, let's take it away. Where are you sitting at, or where do you stand on kind of maintaining or upgrading your deck as time passes by?
Yeah, so I mean, we all like getting shiny new toys, and I think it's like easy to, you build a new deck, or maybe you buy a precon and you love playing it. You stop playing some of your older decks. So every once in a while, it's great to just kind of blow off the dust from your deck boxes and make sure that the cards are still all in there. But going through and we're talking about decks that get neglected. It's easy to pull cards out of I have a strong card in a deck that I never play. Well, let me yoink it out. And sometimes you forget to put cards back in. I mean, I've pulled out deck lists that I've been like, oh, this is a super fun blast from the past, and then I play the deck and I'm like, oh, there's actually only 98 cards in here. Yeah, I've cheated at Magic the
Yeah.
Gathering on accident just because of
No.
improper deck maintenance.
You've upped your card drawing average is what it is. It's like, if you slightly thin the deck, you just increased your fun by being able to draw other cards more frequently.
Right, which is a legal Magic the Gathering mechanic. It's really good.
Totally legal. It's like Yu-Gi-Oh, where they don't have a deck cap. It's like that, but ignoring the rule of where there actually is a deck size restriction.
Yeah, and so sometimes when you look at like an older deck, you can kind of, if you give it a chance, you play it, you slam down the cardboard, you see that you're like, this sucks, or maybe there's something new and exciting that's been released. Especially with this product fatigue, there's so many new sets being spoiled, so many cool new legends. You might take a deck that you never play and just pivot it into something else without having to swap out too many cards. If I have to change like less than 10 or 15 cards, maybe to make something a little bit more on theme, or I have just a generic Simic value engine, it's super easy just to upgrade that by throwing whatever the new commander of the week is, and fixing up the set mechanic specific stuff. So
No, I'm guilty of that too. So we didn't talk about this actually ahead of time. This was sort of a off the cuff conversation that we both decided would seem like a solid topic. But as we're looking at this, I'm literally staring on the other side of my microphone here at the tower of deck boxes I've accumulated, because I'm in the process of logging my card collections just so I have a better
uh-huh
feel for what we have out there. And I literally added all of my decks into Moxfield.
oh yeah.
Now, not like full deck lists, but I added, hey, here's all the commanders so I could kind of keep tabs on what decks I have out there. And I have 19 decks, apparently, of which I can tell you I don't play 19
Right.
decks on any given, like, weekend. So I've actually taken steps to kind of tear down some decks that maybe don't see enough playtime to really justify, or maybe I got them because they were precons and they seemed nice and shiny out of the box, but as time went on, I realized it just wasn't a playstyle that appealed to me.
Sure, or maybe you have like an overlap between two of your decks, and it's like, well, you only get to play so many games per month. Sometimes you kind of got to condense just to keep your gameplay experience nice and fresh.
Mhm. You know what, and that's a good point too, as far as like overlap. So this is an experience I've had when it comes to like planning decks I want to build, and you can tell me if you've had this too, where you go, "Wow, this looks like a really cool commander in a certain theme,"
Uh huh.
and I'll use for example like Merkel, Lord of Bones. He's Abzan, what black, green, white, and he's enchantment based. Well, he's super cool. Really like the kind of play style. It's like a reanimator enchantment kind of deal. But then I have an Enixia deck because I got the Commander Masters precon.
Right.
Guess what? Same colors, same kind of enchantment recursion essence, just in an opposite direction. And then Shelob comes out in Lord of the Rings. That's black green, also kind of like this weird recursion as artifact thing, where you just run into like there's so many similar commanders that might have a slightly different twist of the dial, but ultimately they're going to be samey in the gameplay.
Well, and they're competing for the same cards, which can be a good thing because it can encourage creativity. If you only have one copy of Smothering Tithe, you're not going to be able to put it in both Enixia and your Merkel deck. So you're forced to look for alternatives, which I do think is great. But also, having your cards compete, your decks compete for some of your cards in your collection can mean that you're having to make tough decisions.
Mm. So I think let's start this one off. So if you have a deck that you haven't played in a long, let's not even say a long while. Let's say you don't find yourself reaching for it as often as you once did.
Oh yeah.
What are some ways you feel are the best way to kind of either assess, do I continue with this deck? Like, is this a candidate to be torn down, or is this a candidate to kind of get some new life breathed into it?
Well, the conversation topic this week is deck maintenance. I don't want to be a negative Nelly, but I'm a guy who likes
Deck,
building
deck
decks.
graveyard. Sure.
So I see a fallen deck as a good opportunity for something new to arise from the ashes. I'm like, oh, I'm just waiting to I'm a vulture flying around my mana base in any given deck because mana base is the most expensive part of building a Magic deck. So if I get those lands
It's also the
unlocked,
least.
huh?
It's also the least like sexy, so to speak, as far as appealing to everybody. Like, hey, don't worry about the other 65 cards or whatever I have in this deck.
Right.
You should see the mana base.
I mean, you say that, but there's nothing that feels better than like a squeaky clean mana base. Like when you can pretty much forget about it. The mana, that's a solid feeling. And so actually, I'd like to mention that a great way to maintain your decks is just to like, hey, let's take a look at the mana base. If you're running a lot of suboptimal lands, like everything, there's so many. Precons are being printed. They don't have great mana bases now, but like everything is getting reprinted. The ally fetch lands are about to get reprinted this year with the Modern Horizons 3. They're like, if you're willing to drop a little bit of dough, or looking at some of these cards, they're relatively cheap. Like, and if you look like the Murders of Karlov Manor has those surveil lands, you can make a lot of
Mhm.
subtle changes that will smoothen up your gameplay. And maybe you built this deck when you were first getting into Magic and you didn't understand the color, the amount of the mana that you have in your deck should reflect the card, the color identity of the cards in your deck. And so like you were talking about earlier, just uploading a list onto Moxfield can give you those warning signs of like, did I build this deck in a fever dream, and is this garbage, and that's why I'm not having fun?
Yes.
Because a
Oh,
lot of those websites will analyze your color ratios and tell you how many what lands produce what mana, and you can make your gameplay experience so much smoother just by correcting like the flow through your mana base.
yeah, I think that's a good idea to look at because you're absolutely right, which is you could have the most fun, exciting, over the top, exuberant deck list and then go, huh, I put nothing but swamps in here and it's really a Rakdos deck. Hmm, maybe that's why I can't play anything remotely on curve.
Right. And yeah, these are typically things that you'll see throughout gameplay, and you'll notice like, oh yeah, like you said, I'm not able to play anything on curve, or I never have the proper colors. But looking at a deck online makes it a lot easier. I mean, personally, there's nothing better for me than like laying them all out on the carpet and organizing them into intricate little piles, and seeing like what I have, what are my themes. Um, and doing that can also, I think, get you a little bit more like, if you have any sort of sentimental value to your deck, like seeing it all out there, especially if it's like maybe you built this. I have decks that I played in college, and they were really like keystone decks of my playgroup's meta. And so looking at those decks are kind of like a time capsule. And even though they have some suboptimal cards, or like, well, why isn't this running the latest Jessica's Will, or blah blah blah, it's like, well, this deck was built in a different era of EDH, at least. And so I like the idea of keeping a deck the same if you have the sentimental connection to it too.
Yeah, I like that. So I've tinkered with decks that are purely from a sentimental value. For example, I've got a Ghoul Caller Gissa deck kind of pseudo in the works, so it's not up and running yet, but I'm working on it. It's going to be my first mono black build,
Nice.
and I'm working on it solely because when we went to Gen Con last year, I went around to all these artist booths and got all their little 2/2 zombie tokens
Uh-huh.
signed by artists. So it's almost like the deck is incidental to the fact that I want to be able to flood the board with a bunch of 2/2 zombies and go, look, this one's signed by,
Uh-huh.
Elena Danner. This one's signed by Aaron Miller. This one's, and just like churn all those out. Um, so yeah, I think you got to have those fun things because at the end of the day, you're playing it for the interaction, right? Unless you're building on, let's say, arena where maybe you're not actually interacting with the person across from the table from you,
Right.
you you got to factor in that like interpersonal aspect to any kind of kitchen table game.
Yeah, I mean, there's it's a lot of, and I mean, that's all Magic is interpersonal connection, especially like over the table when you got four people sitting together. Everybody knows everybody's decks, and so I think, first off, I think your Ghoul Call Gisa deck sounds awesome, and I'm super excited to see it. I love being, a horde of zombies being unleashed upon the table at any given time. But and having that sentimental connection through the tokens is going to make this deck a unique piece in your collection, regardless of if it's super strong or if it wins a ton of games.
Mhm.
And just because a deck doesn't win a ton of games doesn't mean you have to rip it apart and take it out. Like, there's room for decks if maybe you're a lore guy, like a Vorthos is the archetype or whatever, but you can have a deck that plays into a theme or like a specific block. And sometimes that's a fun direction to take a deck too. Like, if you're interested, if you have a deck that you like but it's not working, you can just like put in a minor sub theme, or maybe change some of your themes to be a little bit goofier, just kind of play into the fact that it's a deck that it doesn't really win, but it does some funny stuff.
And what's funny is I've actually had the opposite before, where I've actually had a deck that every time I brought it to the table, it just seemed to do what it wanted to do. It did it very well. And I actually tore it down because I found myself just not having fun with it. Like,
Sure.
and I can tell you, so the deck was the Chishiro Shattered Blade, like precon, the Gruul
Modified
precon.
creatures.
Yeah, modified creatures, counters, auras, all that kind of stuff. It was a very well functioning deck out of the box. Like, it just popped off. It seemed like every time I played it. It helped that it had two Cinder Glades pre-printed
Oh
right
yeah.
into the box. um, which, by the way, I was aware of, and I still left them in the box because I was like, I'm too lazy to swap this out, and I forgot about it until every single time I drew both of them.
uh
But
the relentless rats of cruel
of
lands.
land.
Yeah.
But I ended up tearing it down just because I was like winning games, but not necessarily enjoying the games. It was a lot of, all right, tick this dice up, tick that dice down. Oh, look, this one's now modified. That
Oh,
triggers this over here.
okay, you're talking about ticking dice up and down like it's a bad thing. Yeah, what about? I mean, I feel like this is a call out on Atraxa, bro. I feel like this is a call out on a lot of my decks, man.
It is a call out on a lot of your decks, especially the ones that run darkness, the bane of my existence.
Still holding a grudge. Um,
Not really, because I slot that into Brina too.
Well, yeah. So I think you make a really good point of like sometimes a deck is just too strong, or maybe for for your play group, you're like you can see the soul and the happiness in your teammates, your opponents, but your buddies. You can see their happiness drain out of their eyes. It's probably time to modify that deck. And sometimes it's easy to just be like, okay, I know what's in here. That is like I draw cards that I often am like, I don't want to play this. I know if I play this, it's going to ruin the vibe. It's going to ruin the mood. I'm talking about like
Mhm.
Mindslaver. I'm talking about, I play a Zergo deck. I'm talking about the World Slayer combo, which is awesome. But sometimes, you can tell when somebody's had a couple L's that day and they need a dub. And it feels bad, playing Kozilek and giving it haste and, swinging at somebody with Annihilator. Like, it's a you got to if you have to hold something back in your hand a lot, that's a good sign that maybe let's just downgrade this or side grade this for optimizing fun.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, I've definitely become a big proponent of like interactive commanders recently.
sure.
So, I mean, we just talked about this right before we started recording, but I'm in the middle of upgrading. It's the Carter the Doom Scourge, like $20 starter deck that came out 2 holidays ago.
Sure.
And now I run the backup commander, Karavik the Merciless, which is not the ideal commander for the deck because it's like 7 mana and it's kind of a clunky at $20.
Right.
But I find it's very interactive with the table because it makes all the other players think about what they're going to cast, and it lets you also make a lot of deals. Like, hey, maybe you want to cast Blasphemous Act, and I won't hit you for 9 damage to the face. I'll swing it at this other threat over here.
Right.
So that's a deck where I'm putting maybe another, I don't know, $20 into it, turning into a $40 deck, which is still fairly budget. But I found a deck that plays well at the table as far as interaction, and people seem to enjoy a lot. So that's where I want to kind of invest my resources into. Whereas the decks that, like you said, maybe make people groan when you're at the table, I tend to shy away from wanting to play those over and over again.
Yeah, and upgrade like you want to upgrade the decks that you play a lot. Like, sure, you could get a new deck, or sure, you could buy a precon, and those are great. But like sometimes if you find yourself, oh, I love coming back and playing this deck over and over and over again, just showing it like a little bit of love every once in a while. Not only does it boost the heart of the cards, but it's just like a nice treat to yourself to be like, oh, I'm upgrading this, or maybe instead of spending whatever on getting a new deck, I know EDH players, how easy it is to add to cart, add to cart, add to cart.
Mhm.
But you
What do you mean
could
I spent $600 on duels?
you can redirect that same moolah into a couple of like choice prize pieces for your other decks, and kind of upgrade them, or you get to draw that card and you're like, this is awesome, Apex Devastator, I choose you, something to that effect.
What do you? Let me ask you this because I know I have one specific mindset about how I go about upgrading.
Huh.
Like when I've committed to upgrading a deck, I tend to focus on that deck as opposed to doing, let's say, hey, the new set came out. I see this card, this card, this card, and this card that could boost 5 different decks, and I'm going to get those 5 singles
Right.
and upgrade everything in a blanket. I tend to go, okay, this is the one that needs a bit of retooling. Let me look at this one, and the other one sit on the back burner a little bit, and they'll find their way into the upgrade rotation eventually. Do you prefer that method, or are you kind of like, well, Murders just came out. Let me see what cards I can slot in and keep everything up to date by the set.
Yeah, I think that's a really good a good transition there, because like I think it's easy to want to do the second thing there where you're keeping all your decks like entirely up to date. But you're Corey, you said you have 19 decks. If you're trying to keep those all up to date, you're looking through the Murders at Karlov Manor set list, and you're like you just end up getting so many cards on there. It's difficult to dedicate that much love to it. It's like your kids. You have favorites,
Yeah,
and then you have the ones
and then
that you
there's the
kind of
ones you
just
get rid of.
no, I'm just kidding. But I'm more so like you, where I have a couple decks that I'm always keeping in the back of my mind whenever I look at a set. Like I have a Marchesa Wizards deck, and so you best believe if whenever I see a wizard in Grixis colors, I read it, I scan it. Even if I haven't been playing Marchesa a lot recently, it's like that's something that I will. Anytime I see a wizard, I will think to myself, would that be good in Marchesa? And then I don't know if I have a good swap in Marchesa, or if I have something that could easily get slotted out. But also looking at an older deck, sometimes it's way easier to slot out stuff because you're like, you no longer have the rose tinted glasses. Sometimes you build a deck and you're like, oh, I need this in here, this is so cool. And then you see it 4 months later, you're like, oh, I haven't played this deck once. What did I put this in here for? Why do I have ruination in this? Like
Hmm.
it's easy to do. And so giving yourself the chance to put a fresh set of eyes on it can make it easier to make it a ton easier to upgrade decks, because you can easily pull out, like, just look through, you scroll through the list and be like, okay, I'm taking out these 5 cards. I have the 5 cards that I think are cool that have been released this week are easy slot ends.
Yeah, I mean, and also I think there's a mental health standpoint to, oh, I'm trying to keep track of 19 decks at all at any given time, and then next month another set will drop. Like Fallout's going to hit in 2 weeks. Time to go through and reanalyze all 19 decks. Like, ugh.
That can be a real pain in the in the whatever.
Hmm.
um
In the wallet. I mean, in the brain. Oh, in both. In the heart.
Now I'll tell you, I do have a little life hack for upgrading a deck. It's a small maintenance thing, because this is more of a physical maintenance on your deck. Sometimes you just gotta swap out the sleeves, man. I find that some sleeves are just unlucky, and getting a new pair of sleeves, dropping that tenor on some dragon shields can seriously buff up get me excited to play a new deck. You get all those dusty, the particles out, and get a full fresh set of plastic on your cards, and they just somehow work better. The shuffling sucks. You got to shuffle them about 45 times to get them to like have that same level
Mhm.
of squish.
You know what's funny is you bring that up as like just a like a pseudo joke, right? But it's like the cosmetic thing does matter, because I will tell you one of the greatest disappointments I've ever had deck building is the first time we were getting ready. We are actually getting ready for Command Fest.
Uh-huh.
You and I were going to Command Fest, and I had just gotten done like upgrading my Hello the Painter deck. And I was proud, right? It was my first time really dedicating to upgrading a deck and kind of building something, making my own.
Right.
And I was like, oh, I'm gonna double sleeve it, and I'm gonna look like I know what I'm talking about going to Command Fest. And I got uh not like non-matte sleeves, what are they, standard or whatever they're called.
Oh yeah. Glossy.
Slick, yeah, glossy, the slick back. And I have never been so miserable shuffling a set of sleeves. Like, oh, all my cards are sticking. What is this garbage?
So they stick together. When I got glossy sleeves, I just put those in a Ziploc bag and just shake them, like a Polaroid picture
You
kind of thing.
gotta like sandblast them first to get the gloss off.
Take an angle grinder to them real quick. Oh, and that's okay. Yeah, so that is a technique though. You can take fresh sleeves and just straight up rub them around on the floor. I would. You make sure your cards are properly protected. If you're using expensive cards, you're going to want to sweep your floor first, because those little grains of sand, you're not going to enjoy that. But just rub it on a carpet and boom, the gloss is off. Well, not the
Oh, you were
not
gonna say
glossy. This is only for matte sleeves, for the record.
for for static. No, I think what you're advocating is you should go back to the old school Magic, where we're gonna take the deck and we're gonna go right out to the sidewalk with those sleeves and just slam them. And when you slam it onto the sidewalk, you slide it. So it's like a slam, skid, and slide across the concrete
Sometimes
to get that gloss right off.
when Corey is being unruly, I go and I take Corey's cards out to the sidewalk just like that. I make him relive this every week. Anytime he plays Brina, that's a sidewalk slam.
And I'll have you know, I just came across a Brina card. Uh, Speaking of upgrades, I
Let's
didn't
talk
get it,
about
but
it.
I was looking at it right. It's one and a hybrid Orzhov, and I can't think of the name off the top of my head, but basically till end of turn, it gives target creature or gives any number of creatures persist.
Interesting. So, do they have to be creatures you control, or can you give it to your opponent's creatures as well?
I believe it is just any number of target creatures. It might be only ones I control, but I don't recall off the top of my head.
So, like, I mean, okay, you're gonna if you
Is
want
that
if
getting
you
soft?
I know you said
Wait,
you're
wait,
not
is
gonna
that
put
getting
that in
soft
there.
banned? Is that getting soft banned in the play group? Is that what you're telling me right now?
No, I love a good persist. Proliferate. I'm a proliferator, so come back with that that neg one counter.
Sure,
But
sure.
if you're gonna slot that into your deck, you got to find swaps. And so, like Corey, what's your method for like maybe you want to upgrade a deck? Like, what are some of your criteria for if you're like what makes the cut? But in the opposite meaning of that, term, or like what makes the yeah,
What gets the
what
cut?
gets the cut? Yeah.
um, so I build my decks in pseudo templates, if that makes sense. So you know how you've always listened to a lot of creators and they go, hey, well you should have 10 to 12 removal spells, X amount of draw spells, X amount of ramp.
Yeah.
I kind of do the same thing, but I do it in 15s, if that makes sense. So I set up all my decks as a baseline of 15 draw, 15 ramp, and 15 removal slash board wipes. So I include my board wipes with my removal and go, okay, 15 pieces of removal.
Yeah.
That's that's just the way I like to build it. And
Leaving
now that
yourself
number will
with
fluctuate.
20 cards to kind of flex your deck's theme or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, and then obviously you look for flavorful pieces in there that meet your deck's theme. So like we were talking about off camera here a little bit ago in Kervik, I'm looking at adding Browbeat, which is kind of an on-theme thing. So it's I can draw 3 cards unless target opponent takes 5 damage.
I think it's any player.
Yeah, it's any player.
Yeah.
So you can opt to take the damage. Well, in a Kervik deck, I have so many damage multipliers. I've got like City on Fire, I've got Obosh, I've got Torbrand of Red of Thane of
The
Redfell.
fiery
All these things
emancipation
that
action.
are gonna I do have Fiery Emancipation actually.
Nice.
But all those kind of spells that say, hey, if it would deal damage, deal X. Well, because technically the spell deals damage, it's a draw spell in the sense that I could draw 3 cards because the odds of somebody going like, boy, I can't wait to eat 20 damage to prevent you from drawing 3,
Right.
very slim.
Right. Yeah, so
So I that's how I kind of I build my decks, and then the cut is okay. Well, if this new fancy card that I really fell in love with is a removal spell, well, what removal spell is obsolete at that point? That's kind of how I operate my decks.
all right, so now well riddle me this then, Corey. So if you have a card you want to slot in and say it's not a removal spell, are you ever taking a card out of one of your 15, 15, 15, like ramp, draw, removal, or are you always slotting that out with one of your 20 flex cards? Or is this something that you're like what's the order, or like what's your priority for draw, ramp, removal? What are you removing first?
So it's obviously very dependent on the commander. So in like my Brina deck, which is a very political based deck, I like to go very heavy on the removal.
Uh-huh.
And because card draw is built into Brina, I can go a little lighter on card draw.
Sure.
But I mean, all things being equal, I'm a draw, ramp, and then removal person. It is how I would rank most important to least important. But admittedly, as a player, I'm a bit of a removal stan. Like,
Yeah, I
give me some
100%
good
agree.
removal, you know?
This man will be like, "Oh, I have 21 removal spells in this deck. I don't know if it's enough."
Oh yeah,
Your Anhello deck.
yeah. So yeah, and Hello does actually is I think it's 20, 21 or 22 at this point of instant speed. By the way, instant speed removal.
And it can all get
um,
casualty for double the value. So,
I know
woo, fun.
it's beautiful. Yeah, I can all get casualty. I actually just got a. I didn't just get it. I was sorting through my decks, and I just found a addition for my
Oh, I
Hello
think I
deck.
remember you picking that up.
A little cyclonic rift action.
Yeah, for
Because
the
the beauty of that in that deck is that I don't need to overload it. I can just duplicate it a bunch and bounce individual targets and not be as hated on.
and that's way easier than just overloading it.
Uh, I mean, I could overload. Maybe I'll just overload it. To be honest with you. Yeah. So it depends. It just really depends on the deck. I also have. I think my heaviest ramp deck is 29 pieces of ramp. And that's Miram, the Sentinel Worm. I just have
Wow.
like Ramp City up in there.
Wow.
Now, I should clarify though. So when I count ramp, I also include like, does it make treasure? Does it make so like old Gnawbones for me is in there as ramp.
Yeah, it's not necessarily going to ramp you early game, but it's going to ramp you late game for sure.
Yeah, so I look at a whole package of ramp. Now, ideally, you want early game ramp, but it exists. But how about for yourself? So you're opening up Outlaws at Thunder Junction, right? And you're like, oh my god, that poor Fibblethip, he's lost, but I found a home for him in my deck. How are you slotting him
Oh,
in?
yeah. So, I'm not as structured. I do. It really depends on the deck. Sometimes you have a deck that's really aggressive, and you don't want to have as many pieces of interaction because you'd like to try to win quickly. So I don't have like a formula. It's just kind of based on feel. Like sometimes I feel like I need more interaction. I tend to go really hard on the draw. I like to be able to keep my hand full, and keeping your hand
Mm.
full allows you to hit land drops consistently, and might not be ramp, but if you keep that consistency up over like 6 to 7 turns, you're going to be beating out people who stop drawing lands after turn 3.
Sure.
So I personally, you know, I'm I like to play a little dangerously with my ratios, where sometimes I'll have like 8 to 10 ramp pieces, or sometimes less if it's a deck that's going to draw me a lot of cards, because you can also kind of not slamming down a ton of signets and talismans and that sort of thing can also kind of help you stick under the radar. Like, I believe it or not, my famed Scarab God deck it doesn't have very much ramp in it, because I typically am able to operate pretty well under 4 to 5 mana, or I'm able to get more value out of that by reanimating like Cryptghast and things. So you can kind of use those like later game ramp pieces to combo off in the moment without showing your hand before you want to.
Sure. Okay, let me switch it back to a little death action on a deck.
Right.
So for you, if you were to take a deck and play it and go, "Hey, this isn't for me. I feel like maybe I want to tear it down, get a couple choice pieces out of it." How many times do you feel like you need to play it before you kind of make up that decision?
None. I could break out with a deck tonight, dude. Like my deck.
You're like
No. I
you're like walk into an LGS, you see that deck in a box, you're like, "I'm gonna buy that deck and I'm gonna tear it down."
I no, I'm just kidding. I like to give my decks a lot of time. To see how I can improve them, or if what's going on, what's making me not have a good time. Because personally, I think like kind of like what I mentioned earlier with swapping out 20 cards or whatever, that doesn't necessarily make it a new deck, but it can make it feel so new, especially if you're swapping out the commander. So I kind of lend to that. Like, how can I change I consider the deck the core of the deck, like the 99, rather than
Mhm.
the commander. And so with that mindset, it's really easy to like pivot a pile of cards and be like, well, this has worked, let me try something a little bit, a little bit more unique, or maybe I enjoyed this theme, or I don't have any decks in this theme. And it's a lot easier than breaking down all 99 cards, putting them all into your binder, or into your cardboard box of despair, and building from the ground up. I like to start with a little bit of a base.
Yeah, I like. You know what? I like that answer a lot because if we look at, let's say, your Scarab God deck, I don't think you'll ever tear that one down because it's so quintessentially Cole.
Yeah, I think that's a
Um,
safe statement.
yeah, but if you said one day, "Hey, I'm not feeling it, but I want to have a zombie deck or something," you could easily take that blue black core and go, "Well, now I want to do Gissa and Geralt. For now, I want to do Will Help the Rock Cleaver or something, something like that."
If
And
I
you've
was
got
gonna do a Demir zombie deck, it would be Grim Grin, the
oh,
corpse form.
100%
Yeah,
Corpseborn.
yeah, yeah.
I really, I'm not a big fan of some of the alternate arts you see a lot of times, but the secret lair, like the creep show secret lair of him that looks like a comic book.
Let me.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love it
I'm gonna
so
pull it
much.
up.
That's really sharp. I'll tell you this, it is sharp enough that I actually looked at maybe building him. Like just off of having that card alone, going like, oh, all right, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, my only thought with him is that it can get easy to get into the rooftop storm, grave crawler combo, just because
Mhm.
it lends itself pretty easily to that. But I love Grim Grin, and looking at this art, it's honestly gorgeous. I might have to see how much this card is going for individually. We'll see.
Yeah.
Um,
But no, I agree. That having that core definitely goes a long way.
Yeah, it can also allow you to kind of explore. There's so many new cards that get released every season. Like we were talking about, there's Thunder Junction, Assassin's Creed, Bloom Burrow,
Mm.
all the Fallout stuff. So many things have been kind of spoiled like ahead. It can be like I don't want to build 400 decks, but I'd like to, try a couple of these decks. Like obviously I can proxy stuff out. I can play it on Tabletop Simulator, but sometimes, you might just like swap a commander and see how it feels. Or like with a lot of these cards that haven't come out yet, you could just draw it on a piece of paper and just try it out and see like, well, maybe I like taking the deck in this direction. Just trying it, or like playing it the same way every time. And especially if you're not enjoying it, gives you an incentive to get it somewhere where you're going to enjoy it. Like at the end of the day, nobody's ever putting a gun to your head and telling you to play this deck. But why do you have it if you don't like playing it? So change it up.
Yeah, and I think this is a good idea too. Going back to your talk of having like a core build of certain decks, and then slightly changing some of the periphery kind of stuff.
Right.
If you go in Moxfield, and I don't know if a lot of people utilize this, but you can actually set packages so that, let's say, oh, next time I build a white deck, I already have a removal package built in because I know that I'm going to definitely run Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile, Generous Gift. You might have Stroke of Midnight and all these kind of things where you're sitting looking at the first, 4 or 5 cards. Or if you're in green, you already know, hey, this is the ramp package I want to run in mono green, where
Yeah.
you can just plug that in and go, well, I took care of the first 10 to 15 cards of my deck without really breaking a sweat and having to sit there and type, Llanowar Elves in for the 8th time.
Well, and with that being said too, there is something about like cards that are so ubiquitous that you see them in every deck. Every green deck has a Cultivate or a Kodamas Reach or something to that effect. Like
Mhm.
sometimes it's cool to split them up and you give yourself those, to find out some of the unique older ramp spells that are, sometimes good and sometimes bad. Like Yavimaya Elder, he's a thing. There's some cool
What do you
stuff
mean
out there.
sometimes bad? It's only good.
There's some the fun tricks out there and cards that'll make your opponents say huh, like especially if they've only been playing for the last year or two. There's a lot of old school ramp or even old schools in like 10 years ago, um
Mhm.
stuff that's late game ramp that I don't know. Like, basically the point is like you don't have to have the same 15 cards in every deck to make it run, but it is convenient to have those packages to be like, I know this has worked for me in the past. Let's just auto include these so I don't have to struggle and like, oh, well, how am I gonna ramp? You know,
Yeah, and I think too, as far as like a creative aspect, y- anybody that's played Magic for a good amount of time has that story that's like, I played this card, and everybody at the table leaned forward and squinted and couldn't figure out what exactly it said because you played some like
Goblin
quote
game.
unquote draft chaff, you know?
So well, yeah, like have you ever, okay, so you're putting all your cards into Moxfield. Are you putting your massive collection of, chaff and garbage cards that you've pulled from packs into Moxfield? Because sometimes it's cool to look through your old collection and just scramble together a deck from what's in your box, like you might have some crazy rares and it's typically not going to be ideal, but it's like a fun way to make a meta deck pretty quickly, and then it becomes a bit of a project. Like you can upgrade it if you want, or you can slowly swap out stuff over time. It's a great experience.
Yeah, so I've actually done that once. So right now I'm in the middle of kind of logging everything, but we did run across a situation where Sharon actually was getting kind of like stale on Gisson Geralf, which was another one of the $20 starter decks.
Right.
So we ended up going through some of our collection and finding that we had a bunch of like cheap recursion spells, like not animate deads or anything like that, but a lot of those, if your creature would die this turn, it comes back. Till end of turn, this creature comes back and you lose a life, or you draw a card, or it comes back with a 1/1 counter.
Right.
That they reprint in like every other set.
Yeah, there's a ton of those.
So we got a bunch of those and kind of built a deck that is admittedly functionally worse than maybe the starter deck, but it plays a lot more entertaining because she can now do things like um fleshbag marauder loops,
Okay.
stuff like that, because it's just weird interactions that she didn't have before, and all those cards are 5 cents, 6 cents that are just lying around.
Yeah, because like upgrading your deck doesn't have to be a blatant. Oh, I poured $30 into a single copy of Jessica's Will, and you might not ever draw that card. Like that could stay at the bottom of your deck for the next 5 games that you play. Sometimes just looking through those 5 cent weird uncommons from every set, you're gonna find some really interesting cards. I'm actually looking at one right now, Smite the Deathless. This is a Lord of the
Mhm.
Rings common. I'm gonna talk. I'm gonna read the card aloud real quick. It's 1 and a red for an instant. It deals 3 damage to target creature, and that creature loses indestructible until end of turn. And if it would die, it gets exiled instead. This is a common, and yeah, it might just be a lightning bolt with like a little bit of extra text, but that extra text is like crazy. And this is a card that is, in essence, it's worthless. It's well, no, it's with little worth, but it is a super, versatile spell that just because it's not $20, and this is still an upgrade over a lot of basic removal in niche
Yeah,
scenarios.
and honestly, a lot of times when you see the difference in pricing on some of those things, it's usually I would argue it's one of three things, right? And you could tell me if you agree or disagree. Number one, the mana slightly changed. So maybe instead of it being like a 2 mana removal spell, it's a 3 mana removal spell.
Sure.
Issue two is instead of saying instant, it says sorcery on it.
yeah,
Yeah,
oftentimes an
you know,
instant is going to be weaker than a sorcery for the same, the mana cost. So yeah, if
right.
being able to do something at instant speed for an efficient mana value is always going to be a little bit more pricey.
And then I would say issue 3 is the popularity of the set. If you look at a set that maybe wasn't as popular, that card might not have seen play, and I think a lot of people are coming back now around on like Lorwyn and Shadowmoor cards where they're realizing like, huh, this is a banger that's 30 cents that's slid underneath the radar for how many years because I only appreciated Lorwyn 5 years after the fact.
Yeah. I mean, well, and then it's kind of corroborated by the EDH rec culture of like, oh, well, let's just load up EDH rec, and if you don't, do any of the modifiers or anything, you're just seeing like the most common cards in every deck, and you kind of, and typically they're good or they work well because like, oh, it's the average deck for this commander. And so if
Sure.
you don't go and like look for those older, maybe a little more suboptimal, a little less optimal cards, if maybe they're more optimal but just in a weirder way because they're like old and they're sticky, then you can find some serious treasures just by peeking back, and a lot of times it's like, wow, how do they even, like, this would be busted if they printed this now, like, what, what's, there's some sleepers out there
Mhm.
even if you go back as far as like the early, the early 90s.
Well, and then we're talking about refreshing decks, right? And I think nothing would refresh a deck more than having you find that cool gem that's a couple pennies or something. You slot into the deck, and the first time you play it, and everybody's like, "Whoa, what does that card do?" And you can tout, how you went and discovered this in like
Right.
the darkest corner of Scryfall, and instead of running like Chaos Warp for the 99th red deck, you ran, some like you ran Zoyowa's Justice that just came out in Ixalan or something
Uh-huh.
like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a that then at that point the card has already paid itself off because like 90% of Magic is just showing off. That's why you bling out the
Exactly.
decks. That's why you make the big deal of your plays. No, I'm just kidding around. But it's cool to have something unique that you're like, oh, you might not have seen this before, but I'm actually going to play like Tempting Licid, which is a creature that you can tap and turn it into a enchantment that gains control of somebody's creature. You're like, what is
Mhm.
that? It's just a bizarre old card. Um,
You know what's completely weird?
huh.
I don't know if you've been stalking, it's gonna be like a weird self plug. I don't know if you've been stalking the podcast on Twitter, but I came across the Licids like not maybe a week ago or
Okay.
something. I literally just on Twitter posted something on the podcast thread about one of the Licids. It wasn't tempting, but it was one of the other ones where I was like,
There's a
it was basically like
blacklisted
lore.
as well. That's really interesting.
If I remember, it was a green one that kind of operated as like lure.
Okay. Okay.
It's it's just ironic that I could have gone another 30 years of Magic without ever running across a Licid, and all of a sudden I'm hearing about him.
Yeah. Honestly, I've pulled up. There's 12 listed cards, and I think I might have to make an illicit listed deck. That's just takes advantage of
2024
these.
listed 2024 Licids are the new slivers. You heard it here first. Cole Licid Engine.
Rukarumel listed deck. It's busted. Check it out. Or Morophon. Yeah.
It would have to be Morophon.
Yeah, these, I mean,
Gantha.
it would not have to be Morophon. None of these cost more than 3 mana. And they all have
Yeah, but you
just
could
one
reduce
color
them
fit.
all by a mana.
Yeah, check them out. Google Scryfall Licids and leave in the comment what list, tag yourself. Which Licid are you? I personally am the Nurturing Licid, which is kind of like a tiger, and he has like a lizard on his chest. I don't know, man. It's a cool card. Check it out.
Like you're like, take our 20-question quiz and tell us which Licid are you. And
You'll
then
be
if you
very
don't like the
surprised.
answer, yeah, and if you don't like the answer, you take it again and again and again until it justifies that you are Naruto. I mean, that you are the Licid that you were looking for.
These are not the lizards that we're looking for.
um, yeah. So there you guys have it. I think that would be our thoughts on how you could go about refreshing your decks in 2024. I would say don't sweat it too much. Like if you've got a deck, it's running smooth. You don't have to force yourself to upgrade a deck. But if you've got that one that maybe in 2023 you were reaching for, but you found yourself less and less seeking it out, yeah, you show it a little bit of love, or maybe you tear it down and it becomes the basis of the new deck that you love.
Or just stuff it back farther in your drawer and forget about it for another 3 years when one of the cards in it has spiked up to be $55, and then blow the dust off of it.
Maybe that's why you haven't been reaching for it. It's too far back in the drawer, and you're just like, oh, my arms, I just can't reach that deep. But I think that brings up to question of the week, card of the week. Cole,
Let's do it.
question of the week comes to us on Spotify. Jammin' Jason, which has got to be the greatest Spotify name.
What's up, Jason?
uh, Jason or Jammin'. I mean, I don't. Let's just assume his first name is Jason and not Jammin'.
It could be ham in Spanish is Hamon.
Yeah, Hamon Hassan. But Jason would like to know, with some of the spoilers coming out from MTG Magic Con Chicago,
Oh, right.
what sets are you now looking forward to the most coming into 2024? And it's a two-parter. Have any of the spoiled commanders spoken to you yet?
Yeah, so okay, so like we were talking about earlier, there was a ton of stuff spoiled at MagicCon Chicago, and personally, I liked a lot of it. I think Outlaws of Thunder Junction. When I first heard it, I'm like, Cowboys in my Magic deck, but on my ranch, 18 Cowboys. No, this is actually a set that I'm pretty excited for. I think it's going to have some, fun gimmicks in it. I want to, round up my partners in a rodeo and all that sort of thing. But personally, I'm more so excited for, coming up, soon as the Fallout decks. And so like Fallout, the deck lists all got revealed. All the cards have been shown. I think they look fun. I mean, I think the mutant deck looks the strongest, but if I had to pick a creature out of everything that's been revealed, it would be my boy Leonardo da Vinci. I know he's not Fallout, and I was just talking game about that, but man, this guy's interesting. He buffs your Thopters, and then he makes copies of artifacts, and they become Thopters after you discard them into the graveyard. It just seems like a super fun mono blue deck that takes artifacts in a unique direction and gets to cheap out like Darksteel Forge for nothing. So Leonardo da Vinci is gonna have to be the choice here.
Okay, I respect that.
Da Vinci?
Da Vinci, Leonardo. You mean Leonardo? Come on, haven't you watched enough Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles?
No.
um, yeah, I think for me, the Fallout stuff looks cool, but I have to expose myself a little bit and say that I did not play too much Fallout growing up. I've wanted to like circle back and get into Fallout, but Fallout and like BioShock have been my blind spots that I want to kind of fill in. So the
Sure.
Fallout stuff looks cool, but as far as the characters, I mean, none of them are like, oh, of course, that's got some nostalgic value to me. Under Junction, I do like the wanted poster stuff. So let's get
I
that
do
out of the way.
too.
The wanted poster treatment is fantastic.
It's cute. And it's
Um,
what's kind of interesting to me about that is that it's like objectively pretty similar to the case files cards of Murders at Karlov Manor, but I feel like the case file cards just did not hit for me, whereas the wanted posters, even though they just don't suffer the same issue of like what color is that card, like the way that the Murders case files were just so like aggressively white just made it kind of hard to like interpret the card from across the table. This is doing differently for me. What are your thoughts?
yeah, I also, and this is going to sound like a real nitpicky kind of commentary on there, but the font, like the type font of the cards in the case file thing, did not appeal to me at all either. Where
Yeah.
it was supposed to look like it came out of a typewriter, of course, but I don't know, that whole layout was just not for me.
I
But
absolutely agree.
the wanted posters definitely have an appeal. I kind of like that Tiny Bones where he's a little 1/1 with Death Touch kind of deal.
Yeah.
So I kind of like him, but I do have a favor to ask of you if I build this deck.
What's that, Corey?
So I would like to you to hear my petition that for a rule 0, I want to make a rule 0 partner commander
Yeah.
of that Tiny Bones and Ragavan, so I can have a little one mana monkey and a little 1 mana skeleton, and I like the idea of both of them kind of touring the wastes together.
Yeah, I am gonna have to shut you down on that one. Ragavan busted. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I'd love to try it out, but just don't get too invested. Is all I'm saying there.
Oh, I've already listen. The deck's already built, shipped, on the way. Um, yeah, I think weird enough, so Tiny Bones has some appeal to me. The Assassin's Creed stuff looks interesting. I think that Ezio Auditore
Uh
one's
huh.
gonna be ridiculous. The one that's like, pay Wooburg if they've got 10 or less life and just knock him out of the game.
Yeah, and which I think is like a not that feels bad. Like if you're down to 10 or less life, like a combat trick that costs Wooburg is going to kill you anyways. Check out our last episode on combat tricks if you have any questions on that. But the other part of that card that gives your assassins free running. I'm like, come on,
Mm,
man! You're making parkour legal in MTG. Like, I don't know what that does yet, and so determining if it's cringe or not is going to make the difference between this card being cool and uncool.
yeah, but I'll tell you that set I'm holding out because I know that there's a card that's gonna be spoiled that is gonna take my heart, and that's Edward Kenway, the best assassin from Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag.
Ho ho ho.
Yeah, no, so I would say right now Tiny Bones is the one that speaks to me the most. But I will say that it hasn't been fully spoiled yet, but Bloomborough is definitely going to be the one that holds me over and takes all my money.
It's got some cute cards coming up. Hashtag furry Jace. Anybody like what's going
Yeah,
on
yeah.
there? I think there's going to be some cute cards. I've seen that Maybell, the little rabbit. It's
Hmm.
I'm excited for that to be some cute releases for sure.
Yeah, they definitely released some cool concept art. You know, they've got Boros's mice now. They've got like Demir's, or not Demir. They've got Golgari squirrels.
Right.
They've got Selesnya rabbits. So they've got some interesting concepts, and I think as a through and through Grixis player that you all know and love me for, Selesnya rabbits might steal me away this year. But hey, but thank you, Jason, for that question. Hopefully that answers it a little bit. So I think to sum that up, we're excited for all the sets, but hit us up this summer when you see us do partner commanders or do two-headed giant as Leonardo da Vinci and a rabbit.
Da Vinci?
That's question of the week. Call card of the week. What do we got
Yeah, so well, okay, I had a card of the week, but now I have a listed of the week, which I think is going to be the new segment everybody's super excited for. There's
for the
12
next
the
12
next
episodes?
12 weeks, and the last one it's not going to be very surprising if you do the Scryfall order. No, I'm just messing around, but do check out Lizards. The card of the week before our lizard
Ugh.
conversation was Mage's Contest. This is an older card that I always kind of like find in my deck, and I think about taking it out, but it's just so much fun, and I always find myself slotting it back in. So it's a card that I can never downgrade or side grade, and it's pretty old. It came out in Invasion, and it's 3 mana, 1 and 2 red for an instant that says you and target spell's controller bid life. You start the bidding with a bid of 1, and in turn order, each player may top the high bid. The bidding ends if the high bid stands, and the high bidder loses life equal to the bid, and counter and counters that spell if I win the bidding. So basically, it's a counter spell. Um, but especially if you're in a deck like you said that has those damage multipliers, like this is something I have in Gandalf that I'm trying to hit this on the on the damage doubler, and ooh boy, it can be pretty interesting.
You gotta save those ooh boys for Thunder Junction. Whoo doggy, woohoo! That damage is a spicy.
And then just to double back, I know I made a mistake there. It's the loss of life, so obviously that doesn't affect damage doublers, but it's still a cool card. It got some really great art on it too.
All right, so check that out. Check out Listens too if you're really want to dig deep in the annals of Magic history.
Yeah, you won't regret it.
But I think that brings us to the end of today's episode. Now, before we go, Cole,
What's up?
and I did not run this past you, but I think we have to do an impromptu happy birthday to a special listener who is also a co-host from time to time, one of our guest hosts on here. So Monday, not as of us airing, but Monday following the weekend this goes live, I believe it is the 29 birthday, because it's always going to be 29. We'll never crack any number past that. Or are we still at 18? I think we're at 8. Sweet 16.
I was gonna say it's a dangerous game listing this online, but yes, you're absolutely correct. It's Erica's birthday, so please, she and I are both on the Instagram account Love and Mana. Give us a shout out. She loves to read the comments and enjoys helping make content too. So and a little bit of encouragement is always great. Happy birthday to her. It's on the 4th for if you're watching this at a time that is not the Friday prior. It's March 4th.
Yeah, you also gotta be careful when you say the 4th, because someone could watch this years from now and they'd be like, what, the 4th of December?
Yeah, it's you send it any 4th, we'd appreciate the the heads up, the high fives. So great call.
So happy birthday to Erica, and leave her some happy birthdays in the comments and all that good stuff. But if you would like to leave her a happy birthday more directly and also speak to Cole, you can reach out to him at loveandmana.mtg, and that's out on Twitter, Instagram, all those good places. You can also talk to me over at Sleevecard and all those places, or you can reach out to the podcast directly at UrCastPod or contact.urcast@gmail.com. Also, hey, before we get out of here, let's give a good shout out, because we have doubled our subscribers on YouTube in the last week or so. So thank you to all the new dragons out here listening, all that good stuff. But we are going to get on out of here. Have yourselves a magical Friday, and we will see you next week.
Bye, guys.